Okay, today I'd like to share with everyone a new theory of value, and it can be applied in the nonprofit world and the for-profit world. But first, a little preliminary information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the basic theory, which is rooted and comes from physics, and it's applied to this economic situation where we have many startup firms that are not generating any revenue, and so we have to have a way of accounting for the value they're producing. And the same issue applies in the governmental sector, military sector, nonprofit sector, where we have theoretically we have no profit. These are all nonprofits. And so trying to establish the value of what these organizations do can be quite problematic, quite difficult, and I want to show you how we can do that. And this is being applied in the nonprofit sector as well as the for-profit sector. I'm going to give you an example, a simple example, then I'm going to give you a bit more detailed example, and you need to let me know, you need to tell me if you have questions along the way for clarification. And then if we have enough time, we can talk at the end. But first, we have to understand that in the environment we're in now, where we have to motivate and use the services of what are called millennials, these are employees from the age of 18 to the age of 32, and how do they view the world? So that's somewhat useful. Then we'll go through the example and we'll talk about how we can use physics to help us understand the value that nonprofits produce as well as for-profits. So first, the invisible hand of altruism. Altruism, as you may know, is doing things that are good for all. And when you look at the millennial generation, you see that having lots of money, making a lot of money, they don't see that as the key to success. They don't define their success as being able to make a lot of money. In fact, 89% do not define success as having a lot of money. So it's a different generation than my generation. And you see some of the big capitalists in the world giving away most of their funds. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, giving that away. And you see, more importantly for discussion today, the rise of the freemium, it's called freemium model. And you see that in companies like WhatsApp, which was acquired by Facebook, Google and Facebook and others, and startup organizations. You also see it in nonprofits. So what we're going to talk about applies in both cases. So these are just examples of what is happening today and the generation that we have to motivate to try and produce the value that these organizations need to produce. So traditional financial and corporate valuation techniques and performance and ways of measuring performance based on tangible assets is really the industrial economy. That's the old economy. Modern measurement tools, such as the ones I'm going to share with you today, have to be able to value these intangible assets. Innovation, we're going to introduce a concept called proto-value. Let me go to the full screen here. You can see this now, is that okay? That's probably a little better. So, please stop me if you have questions. Now, in the physics of value, it's value in motion. Value is not a static commodity, even though we treat it that way when we think about money. Money is a static quantity. But really what happens in organizations such as Google, Facebook, Homeland Security, the Army, the Navy, governmental services, etc., is that there are individuals in these organizations that are producing their creative talent. They have creative talents, and together they produce innovations, new ideas, and these new ideas occasionally are converted into something real in the form of an application, in the form of a new policy, in the form of a new strategy, etc. Okay? And as this conversion process happens, we see an increase. What is happening from those companies and those governmental organizations is they're increasing the potential field. They're projecting this field out onto consumers and citizens of their countries or states or cities. They're projecting these new services, these new possibilities out into that arena. We'll call it a marketplace. So the potential field then, in this case, would be the total number of products or services in a governmental organization, a military organization. Since governmental organizations, military organizations typically do not produce physical things. They have contractors do that. But they do produce services. So we'll think of them as producing services, and they project this field out into their citizenry, just as a new startup firm or a firm like Facebook or a firm like Google or a firm like WhatsApp projects this field out into all of these consumers or citizens. As these citizens then begin to use these new applications, these new services, or existing services, doesn't have to be a new service, okay? They are extracting what we would call work from the energy that these companies and these organizations have produced. So out of this total amount of energy that's produced and projected onto this field, work is extracted, and this is where value is realized by consumers and by citizens who use these services. Any questions about that so far? Okay. Well, to stop me if you have questions. So let's define the terms for this framework for estimating organizational innovativeness, whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit or governmental, military, etc. So this is also a framework for estimating the value produced by these organizations. So these concepts we'll use interchangeably. So we talk about mass. Those of you who've had a basic physics class or just anything related to that kind of understand that this is the relative weighting, the weight of something, the mass of something. And we'll call that the relative complexity, not in a negative sense, but the relative complexity of the service, the relative number of features in a service or in these services. Then we also have to have the total number of services being projected out into that field of consumers or citizens. And we can talk about email, text, image sharing, etc. We can talk about, in the military, we can talk about human intelligence, signal intelligence, fusion-based intelligence, or intelligence services. Then we have a potential field. Well, that's what we've created now. With the relative mass of the individual services times the number of those services gives us the potential field that we've created. Another concept that's useful here is the concept of velocity, and that is the change in the rate of potential field over time, over a period. And what we will see in a minute is that the notion of velocity and this concept of velocity is used interchangeably in economics, in business, in not as much in governmental organizations, but I think that they begin to see the value of this concept in what they're doing as well. And as we found that as we work with those governmental organizations, particularly the military and Homeland Security, that there's an increase in the rate of change of this potential field as they produce new services of a certain complexity. Everybody okay so far? Any questions? Okay. If not, we move on. Okay, so here is a simple example, okay? And we have these different kinds of services with their relative weighting: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. You could also say, you could, if you were in the military, you might call that signal intelligence, human intelligence, and fusion intelligence, or something like that. You could use, it doesn't matter, you can use the same framework in a for-profit or non-profit case. So if we take the horizontal column of the year 2010, and by the way, you need to look at the bottom of this table and you see the mass per service weighting. It's on a relative scale of 1 to 10. So infrastructure as a service is more complex, twice as much mass as software as a service in this particular example. Then when you look at the horizontal row to the year 2010, you see that infrastructure as a service generated 56 units. Well, that would be 8 units of weighting times 7 services gives us 56. So you follow that through, the same logic applies through all of that, and you add all of this potential that we're creating from infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Then the total then is in the potential field that's generated is 168 units of energy, okay? Then we have a column called velocity of services, and this is the rate of change of introduction of given services of a given weight in a given point in time during the year, okay? And then we have potential users, and in this case we have 100 users. You can also say 100,000 users, 100 million users, 1 billion users, whatever designation you want to use for the number of users. This is just a simple example. And if we multiply the potential field, the total potential field, 168 times 100, we get the total energy generated, total potential energy, which is 16,800 units of potential energy. Now, following the same logic through each of those rows, we come to a total over a 3-year period of 81,888 units of energy total, and 345 potential users, 345,000, 345 million, etc., depending on how we scale that. So are there any questions on this table so far? All right, let's move on, and please stop me. Now, if we wanted, for example, to understand how innovative is my organization, how innovative am I being in Homeland Security, how innovative am I being in the Army, how innovative am I being in the government in offering services to my public, to my constituents, okay? What we could note is the velocity, the rate of change in innovativeness, the rate of change of introduction of those services over that period of 3 years. And you see the 1, 2, 3, the years 2010 through 2012. Okay, and there's a reason we use 2010 through 2012, because we're going to use that same time period for Google and Facebook a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so now you see what's happening. And if this is your organization and you are concerned that you want to continue to be innovative, then you have to be a little bit alarmed at the fact that the rate and change in innovation has gone down dramatically from 2011, year number 2, to year number 3. And there may be a host of reasons for that. And this would give you an idea that you need to investigate if you're the manager, if you're the analyst, you want to help and try and figure out, but at least you have this information to go on to do that. So moving along, let's say that we have a high-tech startup, okay, and we're very concerned about usage, the usage of our service offerings. Let's say we have a governmental organization and we're very concerned about how much the citizens are using what we're offering, the services that we offer. If we offer many services and the citizens don't use them, then we're really not generating, we're not extracting real value out of what it is that we're doing. And the same applies to a startup, a new company. It also applies to an old company, an established, mature company. So what we have is the number of potential users, which we already talked about. You can put that in terms of users or uses. You will see with Google, they will use the concept of uses, and Facebook uses a concept of users to talk about their potential market that they're trying to project their services on. Then we have the number of actual users. Who's actually using the service? How many actual users are there out there? And so what you have is something from the prior slide, from the prior table. You have the potential number of users times the potential field. We've already done that work, and we know what the energy value is, the total potential energy. We call that proto value. That's what the organization has produced and projected out onto their field of users or their field of citizens. Now, an important new measurement would be who's actually using these services, how many citizens are actually using the service, how many potential users of the for-profit company are using those services. This we will call work. And work eventually then can be monetized in a for-profit company, and it represents the energy in use in a nonprofit company. Okay, so now we take from Table 1, we take some of our numbers from Table 1, potential users, and then we've already, if you take the row of the year 2010, we had 100 potential users, or we can say 100,000 or 100 million or so on, however we choose to calibrate it. And then we knew the potential field was 168. That's from Table 1. Now what we have is the actual users. And we have 40 actual users. So when we look at the total energy from Table 1, 16,800, our actual utilized energy is 6,720. As we go through and we look at this over a 3-year period, we can also trace the velocity and the rate of change of work, our actual usage or actual value realized, and we see that on average we have a 56% yield from our total potential energy that we project. We have a 56% yield. Now, what we need to know is a baseline yield so that we can compare whether we're doing well or not doing so well. Maybe that's a good yield, maybe that's not a good yield. We can do individual yields for individual years as well. And this gives us some information. We can also look at the velocity and the rate and change of usage. And when you look at that, you see that as we projected this field out there to our citizenry, to our potential customers, we started rather well, and then it declined rapidly in year number 2. Then it began to pick up again in year number 3. This is really critical information to prove to yourselves, to your organizations, that you're producing more value that's actually being used, actually being realized by your citizenry, or you're declining in the use of, and you're declining in the production of that real value. So you need to know that because it'll help you develop strategies to improve the yield, to improve the usage. And there may be a variety of reasons for this. Perhaps when you started in year number 1, the services were relatively simple to use and there weren't that many, so the citizenry took advantage of it. Perhaps in year number 2, you increased, as if we went back to the prior slide on the velocity of innovativeness, we would see the opposite. We'd see an inverse curve to this one. Perhaps in year number 2, you produced too many services and it was too confusing for the consumers and they began to not use it as much, okay? And then maybe in year number 3, you stabilized those services, they became aware of how those services work, they became more familiar with those services, more comfortable with them, and they began to use them more. And then we have an uptick in year number 3. So now I need to stop at this point and see and ask the audience if they're ready for a more complex presentation, because I can, if you're not, I can just show you very quickly that we have a more complex, or let's say a more detailed analysis, which is a bit more detailed in terms of the mapping of physics concepts to our economic concepts. And in this case, we were using a company called WhatsApp as our example. I think what I'm going to do, because of the time limits, I'm going to go past this unless you want, if you want an explanation of this slide, it's fairly straightforward. And you can see how we're defining things here. And then the key to this is the fit matrix. And that is meeting the need and the satisfaction requirement, and meeting that need, that gives us a fitness matrix for our service to our audience. And that is a rather important concept in any organization that's projecting these services out to a public or out to a consumer. So that's an important introduction of, that's basically the primary new concept in this more detailed example. So let me move on. From this, from what we had in the prior slide, now I can generate a series of numbers and I can explain where those come from. And that is explained after the word where and the colon, and you see the quantity is 1/2.2, the quantity of satisfaction. You see 0.5 hours a day, the quantity of need, or in this case, messaging. And the fitness matrix is about 30%. So maybe not quite as high as we'd like. And the average number of times that we have to delay to get this messaging capability when we're using it is about 10 seconds. There's about a 10-second delay that has to be taken into account. At the end of all of this analysis, it's a fairly simple mathematically. We have 24.54 proto value energy units for this messaging service. And we can do this for all the services, all 3 services we mentioned before, and however many services you have, to get a total proto value energy analysis for the entire organization. But it takes a bit more work than the prior example. The prior example, which was simpler, is meant to be used to do a very quick, relatively quick analysis. And in most cases, it is sufficient for what is needed inside an organization. If you have to present this, your analysis to a reviewing body that may be somewhat critical, you may want to use this more detailed approach, which will provide even stronger analysis and even stronger results, more precise results. But here's the situation. If you're the company that we're looking at, and your company is WhatsApp, you have competitors. You have Viber, Snapchat, Line, Tango. You actually have a new one called Telegraph that's not on the slide yet, Kik, iMessage, WeChat, Kakao, Talk. You have all of these competitors. You're trying to survive in this relatively difficult environment, and these competitors are trying to draw away your market. Now, in a monopoly situation where you have no competitors, such as the case in many governmental nonprofit organizations, then you don't have to worry about the competition. You simply do the simple analysis, and that should be sufficient to make an argument for how much value you are producing at a given point in time with those services that you're offering to your public, your citizenry. But if you're in a for-profit organization, then you have to take this into account. And following the analysis, if we do a hypothetical analysis and we say that on day one, we raise the price of WhatsApp from $1 a year to $7 a year, which doesn't sound like very much money, doesn't sound too burdensome, but it is for many of the customers that use WhatsApp. That is a significant increase. But nonetheless, doing this analysis, if we have a competitor, let's call our competitor the new company called Telegraph, which offers very similar services, and it's free. When that competitor enters the marketplace and begins to compete with WhatsApp, on the first day of that competition, WhatsApp, according to our analysis, has an 87-to-1 advantage over this new competitor. Now, after a year, if WhatsApp maintains their higher price and let's call it Telegraph maintains their zero price, free, the free model, and we do the analysis, we find that the competitor has a 400 to 87, more than 4 times advantage over WhatsApp. So in a competitive environment, this is a useful thing to understand and know and to be able to predict. That's the purpose of this more complex example, this more detailed example. Now, let's look at some real numbers from Facebook and from Google. Google tracks the velocity, the rate and change in terms of the uses, the screen views, etc. Facebook tracks that in terms of users, the number of users that they generate and use their service over time. And as you can see from Facebook, the red line on that bar chart is their revenue, the velocity in the rate and change of their revenue growth. They're continuing to grow their revenue, but the velocity slowed down dramatically from March, let's say from the last quarter of 2010 to the third quarter of 2012. And these are actual real numbers. When you look at the velocity and the rate of change in the number of users over that same time period, well, actually a prolonged time period, you see that in spite of a little blip, the curve looks very much similar to the revenue curve. But the difference is when you look at the velocity and the rate and change of users, you see that that curve provides that information sooner than what it's provided in terms of the actual revenue velocity. So it predicts the revenue velocity. That's very useful to investors and to the company itself. Then when you look at Google, and again, these are not, you have to calibrate, they're calibrated a bit differently, but you see that the curve is also rather similar, except that it predicts the dip in revenue, which happened in 2010, began to happen really, the velocity began to change in 2008 and went down dramatically in 2010. You see the same thing, only if you smooth the curve for velocity and the usage, it happened sooner than that revenue slowdown. So that's also useful. And those are real-world examples. So let's conclude. One of the things that you conclude is that altruism, which is supposed to be the purpose of most government nonprofits, is a practical way to build a business. It's a practical way to build an organization, and it pays dividends over the long term. And it motivates these young millennials, these young people that we have to motivate to produce more proto-value. And the idea is do what you love and the value will come. Or if you're in a for-profit company, do what you love and the money will come. And that's more or less the philosophy of these millennials. So, but importantly, proto-value comes before actual value, monetized value, or realized value in a nonprofit. So increases in proto-value lead to increases in this realized value. In a for-profit, it's monetized. In a nonprofit, it's actual value, okay, actual realized value. So the engine of growth in either type of organization is proto-value. Do proto-value and focus on increasing proto-value, and statistically, the actual value will follow. And that concludes my presentation, and I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we have any time for questions?
Sorry about that. We had some noise interference here. Thank you so much. This was an excellent presentation. We do have a few minutes for questions, so we're going to just wait for our participants. Hopefully they will take advantage of this great opportunity to have their questions answered by an expert in the field. So in the meantime, Dr. Housel, would you like to share with our participants why they should attend this convention and what they can expect to learn in Cartagena?
I think that what the participants will get are some very practical approaches to understanding how their organizations can improve and understanding how well their organizations are performing in the current state that they're in. In my particular presentation, I think it's very useful for nonprofits, governmental, military, etc., to have a defensible theory of value that can be quantified, and so it becomes less subjective. If you do not have a representation of value in a nonprofit, governmental, military organization, if you don't have a representation of that value in a quantitative way, then you will be forced to talk about costs. And when you talk about costs, the only thing you will talk about is how to cut the cost. And that's a dangerous, very dangerous spiral. It's called the cost-cutting death spiral. And to avoid that, it's useful to have a defensible way of, showing that your organization is producing value quantitatively. And some of the other presentations, you'll understand how, people can manage their portfolio of assets and so on.
Dr. Housel, we're just giving our participants a few more minutes to gather questions.
Okay, no problem. I don't mind taking, we've been using the approach, and we've been valuing particularly military organizations' outputs, their services for about 13 years. And it's been rather successful, and it's affected a lot of decisions that military leadership have made with regard to investment in new technologies and let's call them new services. So it does help them tremendously to have a way of valuing what it is that they do. The same approach can be used in a library, in a tax service. It doesn't matter what it is. One of the things about the physics framework is it can be applied anywhere. That's one of the beauties, that's one of the benefits of using that framework. And even if you only use the simple, use the simple approach, it can be quite powerful because it helps you establish the value, the real value of what you do, what your organization does.
Okay, we have one question here from Jorge Luis, and he would like to know, I'm going to read the question. Why why open-line courses can be altruistic?
Like massively open line courses?
I'm not sure this is the question exactly as he posted.
They can be altruistic because they're free, and they benefit those that can take those courses. For example, my wife has been taking child development courses and music appreciation courses, and they're absolutely free, and they benefit all of the users, and eventually they benefit the world because the people in the world can become more educated and therefore make better decisions and be more productive. So these free online courses benefit everyone. I don't know if that answered his question. I hope so. I don't know.
Yes, well, yes, but thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Good. Good. I would like to ask the panel a question. Was it difficult to follow the simple, the relatively non-complex example of the startup organization with the tables? Did they make sense? Were they able to follow that? Did they have any problems understanding that?
We don't have any notes here, but we ask our participants to share Dr. Housel's questions. You can type it in the chat so we can discuss them.
I should type it in?
No, actually our participants.
Okay, I see. Because that helps me understand whether I should use the more complex example or just the simpler example.
We have one more question, and this is from Paola. She would like to know if the correlation between product value and revenue is always positive.
Well, the correlation between work or actual realized value and revenue is, when we say positive, it's definitely a positive correlation, but it doesn't mean that it always goes up. It could be going down as well. But the correlation between those two things, they're definitely correlated. And the other thing to realize is proto value estimates of that and work precedes the actual revenue. That's why when you look at the Facebook and the Google velocities, you see that the production, the rate and change, basically a proto value, preceded the actual monetized value. So it comes before. So it's quite useful in predicting changes in revenue. We don't talk about stock price because stock price is much too difficult to understand. It's too complex. But revenue is very concrete, and we can look at it over time, and we can look at it historically. So we use a historic fitting. We fitted the model to historic data, and it worked very well. Should I say more about that? Or?
No, this is perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Housel. Once again, we would like to thank you. This was a very informative and interesting session. So we appreciate your time with us today to share your knowledge and to answer questions for us.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all, and I enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in Cartagena.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.